weird. Press,
Can you
yeah,
see
go
that?
ahead.
Can you see? Did it come
Recording
up
now.
recording starting?
Yeah, we
There
are
we
live.
go.
We are 3, 2, 1, action.
Boom.
How are you doing, Rabid?
Well, it's been a tough couple of years, Alice Rose. I've decided to sneak back in through the back entrance of YouTube, and I'm just
Mm-hmm.
forgetting that 2021 ever happened.
Yeah,
How about you?
that's sometimes it's good to do that. Sometimes it's good to erase things out and put
Yeah.
them somewhere quiet and private. I did that with my 40s. I wiped out a whole decade, so you're all right. It works.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm just going to wipe out all the odd numbers, you know?
Yeah,
2022 might be okay, but 2021 was a nightmare.
yeah.
2019 was a nightmare. 2018 was
Mm-hmm.
great.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember we spoke a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I've known you for 2 whole years, and it's not, it's 3. It's 3 years, isn't it?
I think you're right.
2000, yeah, so I wiped out a whole year for no reason, you know. But yeah, the old
Chris Watts brought a lot of us together, didn't
did indeed. I'm kind of, I think he's surrounded in so much drama. Excuse me. I've not lost interest, but there's nothing sort of any depth to discuss about him. You know, I'd like to discuss him as being a human being rather than a monster, because he is a human being. His acts were monstrous, weren't they? But
he?
uh, and he said that this doesn't define me, and that's quite a shocking thing for any killer to say, that it doesn't define him. But from his viewpoint, it doesn't define him. From his mother's viewpoint, it doesn't define him. From, you know, he's still their son, and he's still a brother, and he's still a friend to those people that were close to him and know him. Um,
Mm.
it can't, of course, it's devastating, and you can never escape what he's done. But he is more. He's not a monster to them, and that's what I think is. It's quite controversial to talk about him in terms of that, because people
Mm.
do view him and do view all these killers as
As monsters.
monsters. Yeah, but
Mm.
they're not, are they? They're not.
See,
BTK was a doting daddy, still a
mm,
doting daddy, you know?
this is the this is what is interesting, and I think dissects the the difference in how some people digest true crime. Because I think
Hmm.
some people, by sort of an extension of not wanting to accept something that might be lying dormant within themselves, that is actually not really as dark as they might feel. I think for that reason that they want Chris Watts to be a genuine monster,
Mm,
and they want Ted Bundy to be a genuine monster, and they want Casey Anthony to be a genuine monster, because it
yeah,
makes the world make so much more sense to them.
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
those that delve a bit further and actually realize that there's some reasons, genuine reasons behind what occurred that could have been out of their control, and in some sense, they are also victims. As hard as
yeah,
that is to admit,
yeah.
you know,
I
then
agree.
if you if you
Yeah,
do that, I think it makes some people afraid, because it's like some admission of something that they recognize within themselves that is
yeah,
a little dark.
Yes.
you know. And I think if you're quite weak-minded, that could really be dangerous,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I said to you last night when we were speaking about various serial killers, not entirely, but pretty much almost all of my research and digging deep into to not just the serial killers' crimes, but their life and particularly their childhood. At some point, with nearly all of them, I've thought, you poor child, you poor kid, that you went through that. And I'm not saying that that's the reason why, but it's one of many layers that contribute to the concoction of rage. This is what they feel. No one kills if they're feeling good about life and they're in a good mood. At the point that you kill, I think is that fair to say that you are at a point of extreme rage? Now, where does that rage come from? Excuse me. It comes from
I
hurt and anger, doesn't it? And pain.
Yeah, because the
And
first
I
thing when you asked that question there, the first thing that came into my mind when you asked where does that rage come from, my impulsive reaction was to say a real acute um, sense of devotion or love to something that has been broken and
yes,
lost.
yeah,
Does that make sense?
yes. It's a mutation of love, isn't it? Some sort
Yeah.
of something precious to you that's been either trampled on or ripped away or wrecked, that's caused this pain. It is from a place of pain, and I think it's uncomfortable because people don't want to afford said monsters any understanding. We think
Yeah.
that and that's, to a lot of people, that's uncomfortable, but it isn't to me. And
Mm.
I think it isn't because of my sense of humanity. Now, I'm not saying that I'm, this excellent person who's got the great humanity. I
Oh,
think
you're all right. You're all right.
many of us do. Many of us do. And I think it's really interesting. There's a wonderful documentary. It's called the um, The Regretful Life of an Executioner, and it's
Hmm.
about this U.S. He was chief executioner from 1982 to 96, I think. He was the chief executioner for 66 executions by electric chair and lethal injection.
Hmm.
And this documentary he's reflecting on his life, and he's retired now, but he no longer believes in the death penalty.
Hmm.
Just that very simple fact tells you so much about humanity.
When
Um,
did he come to that realization? Was it during that
towards
period or
towards the
towards the end?
towards the end of his career, yeah, he's
Hmm.
contemplating life. He's contemplating that he took the lives of 66 prisoners, criminals.
Hmm. Hmm.
I haven't watched it for a long time, but I came across it, came up in my feed, and I thought, yeah, I remember that. I remember that documentary, and I need
Hmm.
to watch it again. But it's so interesting. He's reflecting on his life as an executioner, and it's titled "The Regretful Life." So he has regret for what he did, and he's talking about humanity. And all the arguments for capital punishment, how it's not a deterrent,
Hmm.
how life is, the I think he has a great belief in God and that only God can take your life. And we've spoken about this where we've said that, whatever you do in life, however horrific it is, or however brilliant and good it is, you have to live that life till you naturally die and suffer the
Hmm.
consequences or the goodness and greatness of it, either or. But you've got to live that life. It's
Hmm.
I just, the killing of a human being is just, it's pretty much the most serious thing, isn't it? It's the
There's
most.
a you could make a there's a sort of connection there to the whole what we all know about the cliche story about veteran soldiers, that come back from Vietnam or the Second World War.
Mhm.
Because I think, just like what you're referring to with the executioner there,
Mhm.
there's a sort of sense, right, that all of us, for a lot of the time in life, we're in autopilot in some sense, right?
Mhm.
And we don't quite fully um, soak in really acute events sometimes. I mean, there
Right.
will be some that are more personal, like, I don't know, relationship breakups or whatever, right? That you can't deny are going to be, you're going to feel to the bone. But
Mhm.
I'm just trying to think of examples of the executioner who's gone through those 66 executions where he's looked into the eyes of the condemned man as he's sitting down in the
Yeah.
chair and about to have the hood put over him,
Yeah.
or the soldier that's looked into the eyes as he's bayoneted someone in the trenches,
Yeah.
that they kind of they subconsciously push the emotion of that to one side in some sense, even though they're
Yes.
aware of what's happened.
Mhm.
It kind of
Yeah.
remains aesthetic in some sense, and then it
Mhm.
lies dormant within their emotions and their soul.
Yeah.
And then, like like what you say, later in life, when you naturally become more reflective,
Yeah.
all these demons and ghosts from your past,
Yes.
all those execution victims and
Yeah.
war victims, they start
Yeah.
climbing from the floor and haunt you. And
That's
that's
right.
that's what
Mhm.
happens in general with people.
I think so. I think so. The the warden, I think he was the warden of Florida State Prison where Bundy was executed. In an interview afterwards, he said that he he watched the execution, and when Bundy, I mean, they had a hood over his face, you couldn't see his face, but he saw when they released the 2,000 volts. That's just a horrific fact in itself, isn't it? When they released the 2,000 volts that surged into his body, his his fist clenched, Bundy's fist clenched, and his body contracted. And he said that he felt elation when he saw that. But he also said that he was ashamed of himself and that he hoped he would never feel elation again. He admitted to feeling it. He's been very honest about his reaction. But almost immediately afterwards, he felt ashamed that he had that feeling of elation. And he hoped that he would never, ever feel that again against another human being. And this is a prison warden who is used to the most violent of criminals, right? Who knows what Bundy is all about. He's watching his execution, and yet he, as a human being, has said he does not want to do that, to feel that again. And that's his humanity. That's not his emotion. That's not his intellect. That's his soul. And that's
Mm,
where it lies, I think, humanity. It's something
mm.
deep within us, and we feel it, don't we? We feel
And
it. We
see,
can't escape it.
and see what you're just describing there, what he was feeling or what he felt. Um, I guarantee that was in more in retrospect, right? I doubt he felt such that depth of emotion in the actual moment that it happened.
No,
Do you know what I
no,
mean? It would be the memory of what he's seen in
yes,
Bundy, in the
yeah.
aftermath, and the actual killing.
It,
Um,
yeah, it was an
Came,
interview. It was an interview, and I'm not sure if it
yeah.
was just following. I don't know if it was a day after, a week after, a month after, but it was pretty sort of. Um, his reflection was pretty fresh, if you like, to the
Hmm.
event. But do you think he felt guilt? Do you think it was a reflection to what was that feeling that I mean, I think he was describing his humanity.
I think so. Yeah, I think they would definitely be guilt in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and it's kind of connected to culture and religion as well, especially well, Florida's in the south, obviously quite religious
Hmm.
culturally as well.
Yeah.
So the part of that is kind of soaked into um, how you contemplate things like that. That it's
Yeah.
morally correct that that a killer should be killed in return, an eye for an eye.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know that
Hmm.
we're kind of taught that in religious circles or even culturally. You know, it kind of dilutes from religion into the culture in the West. You know, this
Yeah.
natural eye for an eye thing.
Hmm.
You know, and if you commit such a deed, it's totally moral and ethical that they should suffer a parallel punishment, right? Even
Right.
though it's not really, is it? I
I
mean,
know. I know.
to
It
die.
makes. Yeah. Sorry. To.
No, on you go.
to it's a. It becomes a. Um. The question for me is I mean it's revenge, isn't it? It's revenge. It's killing someone for revenge because you've killed someone. You then have to pay for your life. And I know that the Bible teaches that, but I think it's the Old Testament that teaches that. And the New Testament, when Jesus arrives, teaches that we all about forgiveness and turning
Forgiveness,
it.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So I think those two things, those two trains of thought, um, run concurrent. You know, all kinds of
Mm.
people draw all kinds of things from a religion. Um,
Hence why there's so many different denominations in
yeah,
Christianity, just as an example, because certain
yeah,
certain forms of Christianity do take way more things literally from the Old Testament than the New
yeah,
Testament. You know,
yeah.
it's kind of interesting.
It's where you want to go to which book do you want to refer to within the books of the Bible.
Mm.
Um, so in the Old Testament, I mean, it's can't you know revenge is righteous, but in the New Testament it isn't. So
Mm.
my question is should revenge be part of the legal system? You
No,
know, I would argue no.
yeah,
Even though
no.
it's emotionally understandable and intellectually you can argue it, but
Hmm.
spiritually, I just find it. I find any killing of a human being just horrific and barbaric. It's a
Mm.
barbaric act. Now, I've seen pictures of, I mean, I love true crime. Now, obviously, I've seen crime scene photos of people who've been murdered, and it's absolutely horrific. But I also feel I saw the photo of Ted Bundy after they'd removed the electrodes from his
Yeah,
head. I found that horrific too. You
yeah. I
know,
remember you showing me that. It
I
was
just, you know,
that
and I'm
picture is. I'll never forget that picture as
no,
long as
and
I
I
live.
won't. It horrified me just as much as the crime scene pictures I see. Now, I'm
Mm.
not letting him off in any way. I'm not feeling sorry for him in any way. I'm just expressing my horror at this barbaric act that's been committed by people who are civilized and sane, i.e., the legal system. You know, the murders that you see these are crazy, psychopathic, sadistic lunatics who do these things. I'm not saying it's more acceptable, but that's how that's occurred because of that. And yet, on the other hand, we have something that is to me equally as horrifying and barbaric, yet it's being performed by civilized, sane uh, system, and it just doesn't. I'm never. I'm glad I think that. I'm glad I'm horrified
Mm.
because I feel I should be. Um, and you know my thoughts on Bundy and serial killers. I think if he were alive now, he'd be in his 70s, and we would have had 30 odd years of studying
Of
him.
research on him. Yeah.
Yeah, and he would have been very similar to Ed Kemper, very intelligent, very articulate, almost. I think he was getting to the point of reflection. Um, Bundy,
Mm.
I mean, Kemper's still alive, and he's contributed so much to the study of serial killers, which the
Mm.
FBI use. He's written papers for the
Mm.
training manuals, you know. Um,
Do
and
you think?
also, sorry,
Do you think it would be hard for some people to accept that Kempler is actually incredibly intelligent? He legitimately has a way above average IQ. Do you think that would be disturbing to some people?
I think that his horrific crimes would swamp any value to what he's able to contribute on an academic, an intellectual, and emotional and spiritual level. I think I think that's the hurdle that society has to cross to overcome. It's too, and I understand it. You know, it's a natural emotional reaction to just say, oh, you know, oh my God, this is just so horrific. Just lock them up, throw away the key, and all of that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. I mean, I don't agree with killing them or anything like that, but you know, just forget about them. Just you know, prison
Spit in their
forevermore.
food.
Leave them to it. You know, but
Hmm.
you know, I think people are too it's too it feels uncomfortable to want
Hmm.
to try and understand such horrific things.
Hmm. Yeah, because well, that's the thing. Because high intelligence, in some sense, tends to be generally um, concurrent with an understanding of ethics and morality. I think
Hmm.
that is something that is uncomfortable, maybe for some people to
Yeah,
believe. But I guess you could say that he's the anomaly, right? Because
right.
would you say most serial killers are below average intelligence or above?
I think they are a
Maybe above,
whole.
actually.
I think they are a whole mixture of, of in any part of society. You've got people that are more intelligent than others in any walk of life, haven't you? In any sort of organisation, you've got people who are more cleverer than others. I
But there
some
might,
are, some are. I mean, they're extremely cunning and devious. Okay, that's for sure. I mean, is that
it,
intelligent? We'd have to.
well, it's a form of
Yeah,
intelligence, and like
yeah,
I just think it may be the case, maybe that there's a correlation between intelligence and the more serial killer types of killers, rather than just the sort of, drugged up,
yeah.
uh, madman that just loses his mind and like
Hmm.
shoots his wife or something, Th-
Yeah,
There's nothing to do with intelligence in that or lack of intelligence. There's no correlation there. It wouldn't have any effect, really, right? That's just a moment
hmm,
of crazy passion.
hmm,
But for serial killers that actually have to plan stuff and they
yeah,
have to be able to trick themselves in some sense to feel calm enough to go through their everyday life without being suspected by their loved ones.
yeah,
Okay, there's a
yeah.
form of intelligence
Yes,
and able to perform in that way, you know.
yeah.
So even though it's uncomfortable, I think it's likely there is a correlation with intelligence
I
and serial
think
killing.
so. I think so.
I don't know how I
I
feel
think,
about that.
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of psychopaths are highly intelligent, aren't they? A lot of them
Yeah,
not necessarily. You can be a good psychopath. You know, you can be uh, what are they? What's the layman's term for a psychopath? A
schizo.
go-getter, a dominant type, a go-getter, the one who wants to be top dog. You know, quite
Mm,
often
a shark.
CEOs, you know, I think Steve Jobs, who's the
That's
head
right.
of Apple, was considered a psychopath. So he didn't kill anyone, but he was very ruthless, not sensitive to
Mm.
people. You
Well,
know,
high level business people, they metaphorically kill people every day, just in business.
politicians, and
Politicians.
many of them would be technically psychopaths. You know, you've got to be able to tread on people, you know, and not be bothered about people, not be, you know,
And the
you're
key
just on your
thing,
path.
and the key thing is to be able to tread on people without empathy,
That's right.
without a without a conscience.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
key. That's what makes them
hmm,
so able to perform at such a
yeah,
high level.
yeah. I think
And
it's to compartmentalize, isn't it? Um, you know, I think there's a fairly broad general view that psychopaths are not capable of love, and I think they are. It's just that they are able to you know, Ted Bundy loved his mum. He loved Liz, his long-term girlfriend. He
Mm-hmm.
loves his daughter. He loved his daughter. You know, so he was capable of that. But he was also capable of extreme disassociation, where the objects of their fantasy and desire and sadistic, horrific acts become something that's absolutely separate. You know, it's absolutely separate. It's something we can't, it's hard to fathom and understand that something can be so removed from you that you can perform these horrific acts. You know,
That word that you used there is key, I think, disassociation,
yeah,
because
yeah,
I really suspect that that is at the heart of what goes on. Because as as I've said to you many times, when we've kind of talked about these types of things, trying to understand the ununderstandable, because that's kind of what we're trying to do, right? We're
hmm,
trying to get closer, in some sense, to trying to understand the ununderstandable, okay?
yes,
But it's fascinating all the more for that, you know?
yeah,
And I, as I say, I would often say to you, how do these people, how does Chris Watts is slightly different, but it's more serial killers I'm talking about. The ones
hmm,
that have a long history,
yeah,
of killing essentially.
yeah,
How do they literally put their head down on the pillow and manage, not
I
just
know,
climb into bed, but to manage to turn their brain off to fall asleep? How
yeah,
are they able to achieve that? And it has to come down to that word disassociation, because
mm,
I suspect that however they manage to kind of warp their neurology somehow through their psychosis, or you know their psychology, they're able to literally feel like the person that's committing the crimes is almost a cartoon version of themselves. It's not really the real
yeah,
person, and they
yeah,
accept that the person, the father that sits down at the dinner table and passes the salt to his daughter, is
mm,
the real Ted Bundy or the real Kemper.
yeah,
And this
yeah,
other cartoon character is just literally um, a suit that he jumps into on those dark nights
yeah,
when he's metaphorically high. Because to
yeah.
them, it's another form of heroin or cocaine.
Absolutely, absolutely. I read a comment on YouTube, some serial killer website. I can't remember which one, but someone had written in the comments they were a reformed heroin addict, and they said that they could not imagine, because they felt that compulsion and that addiction, and they when they were in the throes of it, there was nothing that could stop them wanting that, you know, that they could not
Mm,
fight that desire to get the next fix. That's all they lived for. It was all
mm,
consuming, and they couldn't imagine, well, they kind of could. They said, imagine applying that compulsion to your the heroin being replaced by a kill, you
mm,
know. And it
mm,
is, it's this this the most awful of compulsions, um,
mm,
that you cannot stop yourself. You cannot stop yourself from tracking someone down to seeking someone out. You know,
mm,
it's the whole thing. It's this ritual. Imagine. It's so hard to imagine, isn't it? We just think of horror and dread and terror when we try and apply that to our own emotions. It's almost, it is impossible, isn't it? Oh, pretty
oh,
much.
absolutely.
We get to a wall, don't we? Where we can't go any further. Can't go any
Yeah.
further to even think beyond that. But you can. This guy who wrote this comment, I thought was brilliant. He said that's the closest he could come to, and he just said how imagine how awful his addiction was heroin, But this serial killer's addiction was to kill. And he said, just
Mm.
horrific, isn't it? And I wonder if they, because heroin addicts, once they've had their fix and it's, they're high and everything, then the high comes down. There
Mm-hmm.
is a point where they feel bad. They feel bad. They
Mm.
feel dirty. They feel grubby. They don't want to
Mm.
do this anymore. But then they wake up the next day and all they want is that fix. So
Yeah.
imagine that. And I do think a lot of these serial killers have spoken about it. And certainly Kemper has. And Bundy in his last days touched upon it. The feeling of coming down from this high. They would resume what we
Mm.
call normal behaviour. And there would be a sense of disgust and
Mm.
horror
Self-loathing.
and self-loathing and fear and panic, but the compulsion is still there. And of course, I'm not saying that it's easy to cope with.
Mm.
You could argue, well, they shouldn't have done it, and of course they shouldn't have done it. But we're talking about an extreme compulsion, a horrific compulsion, and to just say that these people operate purely as monsters is incorrect because
Mm.
they don't. They are humans. BTK, after he slaughtered 4 people, I think he just went home, got changed, and had dinner.
Did
Right? He was
something
able to do
incredibly
that.
mundane.
I know.
Something just absolutely every day, and
Yeah.
I suspect it was completely unnoticeable that there was anything up with him to his
Yeah.
loved ones, to his wife,
I think he
right?
probably pushed it right from his mind. I think, I mean, I could be talking a load of nonsense, but how do you cope with that? How would you?
It
And I
comes
think
back
it's
to that word.
important.
It's that word disassociation.
Yeah.
It's just like maybe there's something about the fact that because these are all experiences that, thank God, 99.99999% of human beings never have to acknowledge or face up to. There's maybe something about when you cross such a chasm, and you
Mm,
take someone's life, or whatever certain violent crimes in some sense, that maybe there's something about the inability to accept that you are now a demon that
yeah.
makes it that desperation within the soul to tear himself away from the actual events, that somehow that makes them more capable of truly disassociating,
Yeah.
like truly, almost in a kind of split down the middle,
Yeah.
almost, you know?
Because it's been so horrific. Is that what you
Yeah,
mean? Because
yeah, well,
the human psyche can't cope. Uh,
it has to
or
tear itself
yeah,
apart, yeah.
yeah, it has to disassociate, and it just has to. I don't even think it has to. I think it just does. I think it's so horrific. This is just my musings, by the way. I'm no expert,
Mm. Oh,
but
we both are.
I think, yeah, I
We both are
think,
music.
yeah. How does a human being cope with that? And that's why I think these horrific killers should not be killed. One, because I don't believe in capital punishment. 2, it's not a deterrent. Um,
Mm.
and 3, there's so much knowledge to be gained. Who else better to find out information from if we want to study this? And I think it's important to
Mm.
study it. I think it's useful to society if we can lessen, you know, one killer
Mm.
not killing 10 people. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that a good
Well,
thing? I mean, there's so much more to it, but that's just one strand. I mean, we can have hundreds of strands,
mm,
that can points of discussion.
for example,
But I think it's useful to society. I mean, the FBI certainly think it is. The behaviour analysts certainly think it is. It's been very useful. You know,
well, how
who
about how
better
about
to
this?
who?
Sorry, on you go.
No, sorry. Carry on.
No, no, I'm going to go off on a different tangent, so I want you to finish your thought.
Um, so if you really want to gain some insight, and you really truly want to study this for the greater good of society, who better than to go to the source? It's the same with anything. If you want to find out about something, if you want to know how something works, go into the mind, into the psyche of the serial killer. And like I said, Ed Kemper has contributed greatly to I think it's 3 huge volumes of training material that the FBI use to this day. Yeah,
Well, he's
yeah.
actually written. He's written himself.
He's written papers. He's highly academic. He's got a
Oh.
huge IQ, but he's very, very academic as well. He's not just brilliantly clever. He's very academic. He's read, I think, some 400 audiobooks for the blind. He's created prison programs to work within the prisons to help rehabilitate fellow prisoners. I mean, he's been in for 50 years. His time incarcerated has been of use to prisons, to society, and to other human beings. That's how I see it. And also, I just want to say, one last point. I'm not saying these people shouldn't be punished. I do believe in punishment. I believe greatly in punishment. And you cannot punish someone if they're dead.
Well, exactly, right. I always make this point on that. How do we know that dying is worse?
I know.
How do we know how's I mean, dying could be, literally paradise, couldn't it?
Yeah.
No matter what you've done in your life, maybe we just have such an ambivalent, forgiving God that everyone is forgiven. So you've just killed someone that deserved to suffer behind bars, to have their freedom taken away from them.
Totally agree with you. I was gutted when Fred West hung himself. He didn't even stand trial. Same with Harold Shipman, who killed 240 odd patients or so. Israeli Keyes, famous American serial killer, committed suicide. So did Richard Chase. They should have all lived the rest of their days suffering the consequences of their horrific actions. They should have been punished. They took the easy way out. They didn't want that punishment. I mean,
Do you know
really,
what it is?
they should have.
They were deprived. They were deprived the real true punishment, which is to have spent the next 40, 50 years without the ability to look away from the mirror.
Exactly.
Right? Because that is the worst punishment that anyone can ever suffer.
Yeah.
If they've got things to feel guilty about. Because no matter how disassociated someone is for 5 years as a serial killer, having their freedom literally taken away when they no longer have the ability to inject themselves with that heroin rush that they got, right? They will inevitably be broken down into the constituent parts of a human being, a human soul, where they have to look in the mirror. And that's where the real punishment comes, the torment. And they have no choice but to wrestle within themselves for some sense of forgiveness for their version of who God is. And it might never come.
You put it beautifully. That is what it's about. It's to live out the rest of your life dealing with the consequences, and that consequence is torment and guilt and some sort of remorse. That is punishment. I mean, if I do something wrong and I feel guilty, guilt is a horrible. I mean, I've never killed anyone, and I've never done anything too terrible, but I've been a bit naughty here and there, and I felt guilty for it, and I hate that feeling. That feeling of any sort of guilt's horrible, isn't it? Imagine you have the rest of your life being punished with that, and you should be if you commit these horrific acts. You should. It's the law of nature, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the law of nature. That's what nature intends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I just want to circle back to what you were saying about, you were making the point of, if they hadn't killed Ted Bundy, they would have had 30, 40 years of research, and to study him.
Yeah.
Well, I could kind of draw a sort of parallel example of that, which could actually be a bit of an analogy that's useful. Because have you heard of Charles Whitman?
Whitman?
Charles
No.
Whitman.
No,
Okay.
I haven't. Is he American or? or English?
He's American.
Right.
He is the Texas Tower Sniper. There's a documentary on Netflix, I think, about him.
Right. Okay.
Um, I'll
Is this
just
is this recent? Is this recent?
no, no. I think it's about 10 years ago now.
Right.
But
Okay.
anyway, so this is from the 60s. 1966. The height
Mhm.
of the swinging 60s,
Mhm.
and this guy was in Texas, and he was in his mid-20s, and he lives an absolute average American dream type of life. I think he was in the army, and he was good at college. He had a girlfriend. Just the
Mhm.
kind of stereotypical American mid-20-year-old guy.
All American guy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And what happened is one day he shot his mother to death in their home,
Mhm.
and then went and climbed up to the Texas Tower, which was above the University of Texas, got his sniper rifle out and just started randomly shooting people down below that were
Right.
students leaving the university. And the cops came and everything, and there was a standoff for hours and hours. And I think he killed about um, 12, 13 people or so.
Mhm.
Right? And then eventually, as the cops were climbing the tower to come and get him, I think he shot one cop,
Right.
and then he shot himself, committed suicide, right?
Oh, right.
But
Right.
but the point is, right, that they eventually did an autopsy on him
Mhm.
and opened up his brain, and then
Right.
because just to give you the context, right, he'd written a suicide letter that he took with him, and
Mhm.
he'd written this obviously before he even killed his mother, and they did the autopsy. I'll circle back to the suicide letter, right?
Mhm.
Once I describe this, because they do the autopsy, open up
Yeah.
his brain, and they find that he's got a tumor which has
Oh,
been
wow.
pushing on the amygdala in his
Mhm.
brain. And the
Right.
amygdala is highly associated with, emotional processes and things.
Right.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
And his suicide letter, he had said how deeply, deeply sorrowful he felt that he had a compulsion inside him that he had been fighting for months and months, that he just could not give in. He had to give into it.
Oh,
And he was
wow.
so sorry for what he's about to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So the
Mhm.
point is that, if they never did an autopsy, Charles Whitman forever is just known as a psychopath, right?
Right.
A demon, a devil.
Mhm.
Shot his mother, shot 11 innocent students.
Yeah.
But he had a tumor in his brain that he in no way was any part of causing, right?
Mhm.
Just
Yeah.
nature. He was
Yeah.
unlucky, you
Mhm.
know? I mean, how culpable could he be
I
in that
know.
situation? But it's interesting because if you really tunnel down deep into that point, and this goes back to how much you believe in how much free will we have,
Mhm.
because you know how we've had these discussions about um, the the people that we become, how good or bad we are, how much is caused by nature and how much is caused by nurture,
Mhm. Yeah.
whether it's the environment that makes you who you are, or if you're already born essentially with the Lego blocks that will construct who you become. Like they're already there, the tools are already there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because someone like Kemper or Ted Bundy, there could have been such a long series of unlucky events that happened
Yes.
to him
Mhm.
that caused him to become Ted Bundy,
Yeah.
to become
Yeah.
capable of that. And in some sense, he also had a tumor on his amygdala, metaphorically,
Mhm.
because he wasn't responsible for that tumor in some sense, because he
Yeah.
was a child.
Yeah.
Now, this is just conjecture, right, about Ted Bundy. You could say it for any serial killer, But
Hmm.
I really suspect, in some sense, so many of the most horrendous serial killers that have committed the most horrendous crimes are, in some sense, unlucky. They're
Yeah.
unlucky victims. And
Yeah.
that's such an uncomfortable thing to maybe
I
say,
know.
but
I
when you
know.
really tunnel deep down into it, I think it's kind of unavoidable because we're
Yeah.
all born, I believe, as blank canvases. And I know
Hmm.
you have a slightly different kind of interpretation on that, right?
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
even you would agree that so much of our environment and nurture is responsible for who we become, right? Regardless of how much you're
Absolutely.
born with. Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally agree with everything you've said. And my interpretation of that is that there are layers and layers and layers of events, tiny events, tiny little incidences
Yeah.
that form and shape you. I agree with that. And my only difference is that I think that every single human being is unique and you are born unique. We've had this conversation, haven't we? You
Yeah.
are as unique as your DNA. Your little tiny character is already, the framework of it is already formed. I think you are born either, for example, an introvert or an extrovert.
Hmm.
Okay. I think that's already set there, and it's ready to, your little character is ready to blossom, and it's within that blossoming that the layers of life events build up. And
Mm.
if you were in a loving, safe um, environment where you're a precious child, then you're going to blossom well, aren't you? And if the
Mm.
reverse happens, where you are subject to brutality and violence, or even it can even begin with just a very slight hurt against a sensitive child, could be one of hundreds of layers. For example, Ed Kemper, when he was a little boy, he was a sweet little boy. They used to have chickens, right? Look after chickens,
Mm.
breed chickens. And one day he came home from school, and one of the chickens, Peter, he'd named them, they were his little friends. I don't know if it was Peter, but I'm just using that as an
Mm.
example. Peter was being served up, being plucked for dinner, and he was horrified and he cried. He was devastated. His little friend Peter was dead, being plucked, and they were going to eat him. Now, instead of the parents saying, oh, taking him to one side and comforting him and explaining the food chain and, explaining it gently to the child to provide comfort and understanding. Instead, I think his parents shouted at him, slapped him about, told him to stop being a sissy, right? Now you
Mm.
think of how that affects a sensitive child. That has stayed with him because he recalls that, he retells that in his own self, psychoanalysis. It's something he remembers from his childhood. So
Mm.
that is one of many layers of which you speak that
Mm.
form that contribute to um, a disturbed individual, and that disturbed individual um, will have many, many
Mm.
other things, will be distorted in its way of thinking about hurt and pain. I personally think that little incident there was possibly the start, or greatly contributed to his distortion of how he deals with pain, and hurt
Wow.
and anger. He loved Peter the chicken, you know, and when he expressed his sorrow and his, sadness at the death of Peter, he got shouted at. He got hurt in turn. I think he got slapped, and was told to stop being a sissy. So imagine how that
Mm.
affects a sensitive child, and
100%.
yeah.
Because I think like everyone knows how much is going on from the years from when you're born up until like 7 or 8 years of age. Everything
Hmm.
is developing at a supersonic rate at that point.
Yeah.
And children, like just to use your example of the chicken, it's like when kids have pets and things, they project so much into these pets. You
Yes.
know, they become sort of their idealistic friend in a sense, like
I know.
they understands them, their comfort.
I know.
Um, and
I know.
and you're so right. Like it's a layer cake, right? In a sense,
Hmm.
that's building up until you become an adult.
Yeah.
And we're all in a sense adults who are victims of the environment we endured as children.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's a
yeah.
strange
I
thought.
agree with you. I agree with you. But I also think I added a little bit about the bud of a human being. You know, perhaps perhaps a child. Right. So let's assume, and I think Kemper was an introvert, a sensitive child. But let's assume he was an extrovert and outgoing and a bit more sort of boisterous and all of that. Maybe that within his character, he would not have reacted to the, you know, being told off and shouted at and slapped. He might have been able to sort of brush it off and think, yeah, you know, all right, let's, yeah, dinner's ready.
Or
It's
or
all good. And then
understand it easier.
yeah, yeah, that's what I mean. I think
Mm.
that that's crucial to understand that everybody is unique and individual. But yeah, I totally agree with you. It's these life events, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, isn't it? Every day is a day of learning. Well, you know, the tiniest things can affect a child. You know, not just horrible, brutal things, but just that lack of sensitivity to Ed, you know, by his violent father and his alcoholic mother, didn't recognise that, you know, your poor, you and I would comfort our child, wouldn't we? We'd explain the food chain. We'd make it all right for our child. You know, don't be so upset, and you know, instead of being brutal towards him and dismissing his sorrow and his shock and his pain. How did that manifest in this sweet little child? You know, it's like I said at the beginning of this conversation, when I've looked at all these horrific killers, their childhood, nearly always I've read stuff and I just think, you poor kid, you poor child, you know. And I'm not blaming the responsibility of their horrific acts on the parents. I'm not doing that.
Mhm.
Um, I'm just saying that everybody needs to be more. Um,
Yeah, because the parents are literally just adult children, you know,
exactly,
and it's kind of
exactly.
it's circular,
Yeah,
you know.
it's the recognition of being better, just recognizing it, being better to each other. You know,
Mm.
listening and caring more. I know it's difficult. It's easier said than done, isn't it? But I think society's lost that, has lost that depth. You know, that depth of
Mm. Do you know what you've just
sensitivity towards.
you just made me think of something actually, because we were discussing before, you know, what should we talk about, you know, is the first kind of like discussion to have, and we were contemplating, let's just talk about why do we follow true crime,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know, and
Hmm.
something you said there just kind of flagged up for me, you know. I think it's kind of connected to something I was thinking about there, you know. I've had a kind of theory as it pertains to YouTube and the whole kind of true crime drama type communities.
Uh huh.
Um, I don't know if this is true yet, right? Because I've not thought this fully through. But
Right.
I suspect, because I don't know if you agree, right? But I think there tends to be a little bit more vindictiveness, judgment, and suspicion um, that swims around the personalities of a higher proportion of the people that are involved in true crime on YouTube.
Hmm.
And I think the reason could be because we're all, and I'm not, I'm not disassociating myself from this, right? I think we all do it to a
Hmm.
certain degree, but when
Yeah.
we're all so used to analysing true crime cases and things, what
Yeah.
we're always investigating or thinking about is the extreme cases, like the
Hmm.
extreme examples of human beings going wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, and because we go through phases of following different cases for a while, it soaks in, I think, subconsciously in a sense, and
Hmm.
it becomes. the analysing such bad behaviours and what people are capable of, in a sense, it becomes slightly normalised subconsciously. And I think people become ever more suspicious, judgmental, cruel, and suspicious of other people in their own community,
Yeah.
where everyone else is up to something, or they're lying because they're so used to perceiving that in the people that they're analysing. But what they don't realise is they're analysing the anomalies in life, the
Yeah.
extreme cases, whereas the
Yeah.
people around them are just everyday people that are not, they're not capable of such bad behaviour.
I
And,
know. Yeah.
and do you agree? And I
I
think it
think
feeds
you
back
make a
in on
valid
itself.
point. Yeah, that's the exact term, feeding back on itself. I think there's a sense of it's like this weird self-imposed bizarre socialization, isn't it? It's becoming desensitized to these all these horrific acts, and it's not just the horrific act, it's the build up, isn't it? It's usually jealousy, isn't it? Jealousy, hatred,
Mm.
rage, competition, all these traits that are in human nature. It's looking at those and discussing those, but they're attached to horrific crimes. But in doing so, it feeds back on itself because you're becoming um, kind of a little bit desensitized and like I said, a kind of weird crime socialization persony
Mm.
type.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It, it,
kind of.
it's it's as if everyone on YouTube in this the kind of communities that we're speaking of, they're all perceiving each other as if they're in a true crime show.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
yeah, I think so. I think so. There must be something in it. There must be something deeper to discuss about that sort of behavior, because
It's
if you
it's like
think about it,
it's
if
like their
if you're
investigative it's like their investigative mindset is on high alert all the time when they're on YouTube
yeah.
because that's what they're so used to, you know? I don't
Yeah,
know if I'm describing or
no, you
articulating it
are.
right.
You are. I get what you're saying totally. It's if you have a passion or an interest or even a job, something that you do on the regular that you're really into, um, and I think that's quite true of a lot of people who are seriously into true crime. I don't mean the crammer so much, but people who it's a strong interest with them. It's like anything. If you do a job, if you're a salesman, you will become a certain type of person. Do you know
Hmm.
what I mean? You pick up the
Yeah.
jargon and the spiel and the way of being,
Mm.
that kind of thing. When I was a
I think so.
secretary, I became very bossy.
Hmm.
I was sort of like that, your typical old school efficient secretary. And
Yeah, yeah.
when I'd get home, I'd have to sort of
You're very
decompress from being
organized,
that person. Yeah, that kind of thing. And I think
organized in everyone's life.
yeah, it's kind of, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think whatever you do, whatever you're interested in, whatever
Mm.
is a daily part of your, a regular part of your,
Your hobby essentially,
yeah,
right? Because that's all it
it
is, really,
rubs
is a
off.
hobby.
It rubs off, doesn't it? I actually think
It's an interest.
I think I'm quite a good detective, actually, an amateur detective. I would consider myself quite a good one. But yeah, suspicion
I'd be an
rubs
A
off.
plus. I'd be an A
Yeah,
plus detective
yeah.
or
You
investigator.
kind,
I
you
really
kind
think
of,
so.
you kind of adopt a different lens, don't you?
Mm.
But yeah, I do think there is an element of that.
It's just
Um,
interesting to observe, because I think there's some of that going on, and I often wonder if people are aware that that's going on within
yeah,
themselves sometimes. I mean, it's obviously not one thing or the other, right? I'm not saying it's all because of
no,
that. I just think it's a component
yes,
because the other things that you mentioned, things like jealousy and this bleeds into the whole problem with social media itself
hmm,
in the modern world, I guess, the cult of mini celebrity. The
yeah,
fact that almost anyone in this modern age in the West can be a celebrity in their little corner of Twitter,
yeah,
face, uh, Facebook, and more so YouTube, I guess.
Yeah.
quite easily. And
Yeah.
in their little world, they are Marilyn Monroe
Yeah.
or they're um,
There is
Donald
somebody.
Trump. They're
There is
somebody, you know?
somebody. I'm a somebody.
And
Don't you know who I am?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Don't you
there
know
is
who
an element.
I am?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's the old ego, isn't it? The old
it's the
ego going a
ego,
little bit askew.
and it's
Um,
like it's the desire to be seen, to have more likes than your competitors, more
I
viewers than your
know.
competitors, because it tells you how important you are. And if
Yeah.
someone gets so sucked in to YouTube that it starts to overlap the good things that they rely on in their real life,
Hmm.
then they're putting so much importance and preciousness on what they're getting from YouTube that
Yeah.
it becomes potentially destructive when it isn't working anymore, or their channel starts to fail, or they're unpopular
Yeah.
because their
Yeah.
entire soul is dependent upon it.
I know. They've got a liking for it, and that liking becomes a need, doesn't it? Um, yeah.
Yeah,
That the old ego is attacked, isn't it? I think that's why I prefer to be a careful observer looking from the outside in, because
from the sidelines.
yeah, because you can see the dangers of becoming absorbed by these things. You become less aware, and that's what's so fascinating with watching human behaviour on YouTube from the outside looking in. You can see it so clearly, can't you? You can see the ego being distorted and getting entitled and rather liking their little
Mm.
sense of fame and
Their podium.
importance. And yes, yeah, it's kind of
It's yeah, it's so true, and you're right, because when you're in the eye, and this doesn't just apply to YouTube, this applies to anything in life. You know, if
mhm,
you're in the eye of the storm, of the hurricane, you literally cannot see the wood from the trees, you
yeah,
know, and
mhm,
you lose all context, and all proportionality goes out the window,
yeah,
because it's like a narcissist's wet dream, that kind
yeah,
of experience, you know, because it's everything is dependent upon how everyone else is relating to them,
yeah,
you know, because
yeah,
that's their barometer of their own,
yeah,
how they feel about themselves.
yeah. Well,
So
it's a
you're quite
taste.
right.
It's a taste of adoration, isn't it? I'm not sure if that's such a good thing. To be sort of praised and admired has to be kept in check, doesn't it? And I think that. Uh,
Healthy measures, basically, is what you
Yeah,
need.
yeah, I do see that a lot where people, they they've got a taste of this over flattery, over ingratiation, over admiration, and they like the taste that they've had and they want it to continue. When in fact it's kind of a distortion, isn't it? It's what's the word I'm looking for? It's
So,
unhealthy. I know that. There is a word
so
I'm looking for. It's not extreme. Bear with me. Intense is an intense version, isn't it?
mm,
You know?
unrealistic person.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you
It's
know what? It's kind of funny what we've done there in a sense, though. We've kind of circled right back to the main point that we were observing about serial killers, is this addiction. It comes
yeah,
back to addiction, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah.
I don't know how we managed
How
to meander back there, but
I know. It's yeah, addiction
because
and distortion. Distortions. I've said that word a few times tonight, and that kind of it doesn't explain everything, but it to me it's a really relevant word to describe how human beings can go wrong. How they can go horrifically wrong, or even just gently wrong, i.e. YouTube, and getting a little bit too caught in and sucked up by the adoration and fame and the relevancy.
Mm,
That is kind of a distortion of something that was, supposed to be a pleasant experience, right?
I know,
Um,
right? But this is the kind of strange thing about, and I think it's almost by accident, just the way things like YouTube are designed, because it's all,
mhm,
it's all, it's kind of fed by the fact that it's like the analogy of the car crash, if there's people walking down the street and
mhm,
there's a gallery on one side of the street with the most incredible worthy paintings in history on one side that you would want to look at. But
mhm,
on the other side of the street, there's a horrific car crash
yeah,
with horrible images. Everyone will look at the horrible image.
mhm, yeah,
And things like YouTube, they and I think it is by accident, just the way they're accidentally designed, is that the horrific or the dramatic are the things that they become viral in a sense, because everyone has to see it.
mhm,
Whether you want to or not, you're compelled to, because it's feeding something within us all, that we want to be a little shocked sometimes, to see
yeah,
something
yeah,
distasteful, right?
mhm,
So I think what tends to happen is people notice that, so if there's something a little distasteful that happens from their own contribution, they notice that it's generating something,
mm,
you know, and then they maybe subconsciously start to skew their own behavior because they know
yeah.
it works.
I know. I mean, we're curious creatures, and we're curious not just about lovely things, but things that are not so pleasant, that are a bit ugly. Sometimes it's even more. You just it's true, isn't it? If I heard something outside my window now, some shouting or fighting going on, I'd go and take a look.
You
It's
would?
just my natural instinct, and I think most people do. It's like, what's going on here then? It's just a
Mm.
natural curiosity, and yeah, yeah, good or bad, people are nosy, aren't they?
That's it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I guess it kind of it takes advantage of that little thing that everyone has inside them, just for a little bit of a rush, for a short period of time, just to be shocked. Shock me,
yeah,
do your worst. I wanna peer over the edge of that
yeah,
chasm into the fiery chasm beneath. I just want to have a
yeah,
quick look.
yeah,
Wow, that's what it's like over there.
yeah, yeah. Well, I do. I do. We're endlessly curious, aren't we, human beings? The human condition is endlessly curious,
It is
um,
indeed.
both to give and receive, isn't it? I know that I'm a very curious person.
We've been talking for an hour and 7 minutes.
Really, I've
That
been
is
dying
fucking.
to.
That
It's
was
great, isn't it?
incredible.